Hello and welcome everybody to this special webinar event 2024 Phishing Insights. What 11.9 million user behaviors reveal about your risk. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Mackenzie Puddesy with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this conversation today because more than ever before, organizations are at risk of cyber attacks, and even though we have software to support our efforts towards a robust approach to cybersecurity, it's typically our human behaviors which are the chink in the armor. Today, KnowBe4 is sharing their findings and best practices around phishing based on the data of 11.9 million users across 39,272 organizations used to generate their 2024 Phishing by Industry benchmarking study. So we're going to be looking at how to radically lower phish-prone percentage within 90 days, understanding who's at risk and what you can do about it, and some actionable tips to create your human firewall. This is going to be such a cool overview of the landscape, and I can't wait to get started. So let's zip through the housekeeping and get things on our way. First, I want to draw your attention to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the best place to get involved, get interactive, and post all your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. We want to hear from you. So find that questions tab now, and let's start out by saying hi, hello, hola, aloha, bonjour, or whatever greeting resonates with you today, and give a virtual wave to the community here with us. As a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during today's session. Knock on wood, of course, that does not happen to you. And don't forget, a browser refresh should get rid of the usual tech gremlins. But if not, just shoot a message in that questions tab and the ATM crew and I will be here to help. And the last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. Go check out some cool resources and follow-ups to our conversation today because it is just packed with great info. First, you're going to find the 2024 Phishing Benchmarking Report for North America. This has highlights of the report and will be reviewed during today's webinar, of course. The Security Culture How-To Guide is also in your handout section. This is a holistic and step-by-step guide for your organization and your employees to adopt in order to think and act with security in mind. And third and finally, a copy of the slide deck in PDF form is also there. So if you are curious to look at today's presentation again in the future, it is easy and ready for you to do so. And if all that cool content wasn't enough of a sweet giveaway, we also have a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you are not sure what those are, you can find those, the full T's and C's linked in the handouts tab as well. Okay, well, with that, we are done our housekeeping. I told you I'd keep it short and sweet, and now we are ready to start our webinar. I'm so excited to introduce you all to Perry Carpenter, Perry Carpenter, Chief Human Risk Management Strategist at KnowBe4, and Joanna Huisman. She is KnowBe4's Senior Vice President of Strategic Insights and Research. It's time to dig into this exciting report. And honestly, I can't wait any longer, so let's dive in. Perry, Joanna, why don't you take it away?
Hey, and welcome to the 2024 Phishing Attack Landscape and Benchmarking Report Overview, the data you need to know. My name is Perry Carpenter. I am KnowBe4's Chief Human Risk Management Strategist, and today I have with me Joanna Huisman, our SVP of Strategic Insights and Research. Joanna, go ahead and say hi so everybody gets to hear your voice for a second.
Hi, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with all of you.
That was amazing. All right. And, as we get into this, this is going to be a session that we do annually because we produce an annual report called the Phishing by Industry Benchmark Report. And in that, we ask and answer one of the most important questions that you probably get asked and have to answer all the time, which is, how does your organization, how does the data that you're collecting, how does the program that you're running compare to those of other organizations, whether that's a organization of a similar industry, a similar size, or in a similar region? How do you compare and contrast to know what success looks like? Because it's one thing to have a number and a metric. It's another thing to be able to put that into context. And so that's what this report is about. And it's about one of the things that we're very passionate about measuring and helping people improve at KnowBe4, which is what we call the fish-prone percentage. And if you're unfamiliar with that, the fish-prone percentage is a metric of how often somebody will click on a simulated fish. And the idea behind that is if you're sending out simulated fish as part of a simulated phishing campaign, and a certain percentage of your population click, or a certain percentage of a group within your organization click a certain amount of time, then that can be a measure of your propensity to be phished in real life if somebody sends out the real attack. So this is one way, in a safe way, of understanding your susceptibility to the most common threat that's out there that is being exploited, and that is somebody coming after humans through social engineering, as expressed by phishing. So today we're going to talk about these few things. We'll talk about the problem of phishing, which I just hinted at. We'll talk about the data that we've collected, the methodology behind that. We'll give you an idea of what's going on around the world with this data, because it is important, like I said, for people to be able to compare and contrast with other organizations that are like them. And of course, there's not only industry-based differences or size-based differences, but there are regional differences in this data. And then we'll give you some actionable tips about how to strengthen the human defense layer in your organization and really work on the security culture component that's there. So with that, let's dive into phishing. One report that almost everybody looks at every year, if they're part of the cybersecurity industry, is the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. And for the past, as long as I've been looking at it, it's been showing that the vast amount of data breaches that they measure and collect data on can directly be tied to some form of human element issue. And when we talk about the human element, we're talking about people making errors, people misusing privileges, social engineering, or things related to security hygiene. And that's why you see things like stolen credentials in this. If somebody's credentials have been stolen, if they've been leaked on the dark web, they're picked up by another cyber criminal, they're used in like a credential stuffing attack. Well, the vulnerability there is a couple-fold. The vulnerability could be that they're reusing the password over and over and over from several accounts to several accounts. It could be that they've not changed their password in a very, very long time after that breach happened as well, which opens up another vulnerability. Another vulnerability that may be there would be that maybe the end user could avail themselves of multi-factor authentication. So the password is not a single point of failure. In a lot of those cases, though, it does come down to, in some way, the human element was exploited and was found to be the path for the successful attack that resulted in a data breach. What we did see, though, this year over last year is we saw some positive movement. It's down to 68% now as measured by Verizon. I think, though, if I'm being honest, I think that some of us could quibble with that a little bit and say that that's probably still higher. But really, it doesn't matter what we agree on as far as how high that is. because the Verizon data breach investigation report and every other report that's in the industry is showing that the human element is by far the largest vector that is leading to data breach. And whether that's 68%, whether that's 73%, whether that's 80%, whether that's 90%, as suggested by some reports by reputable organizations, it doesn't matter. The thing that does matter is that this is an area that deserves focus because it is the primary area that's being exploited, and it's an area that if we're serious about reducing risk in our organizations, improving the security posture of our organizations, helping the organization move further and faster so that it can accomplish its business goals, then we need to focus on the human side of things. And no matter how much improvement gets made, as long as this is the primary factor, the job is not yet done. And so then we ask the question, if that is the primary factor, if that continues to be the primary thing that's being exploited, well, why and how is that so? And it gets to be pretty easy when you really think about it. Cyber criminals, bad actors, scam artists, they're always looking for the point of least resistance. When you think about any crime drama that you've seen, anytime you look at some form of exploitation, three things come together. It is means. So what's the technical way of getting something done? How is that done? What is the tool? What's the path? Motive, which speaks for itself. Why does somebody want to do something? And then the opportunity to do it. And when you think about it, it takes very little motive and opportunity if the means to accomplish that thing is the easiest way to do it. And so you do get to areas where the human is exploited and an organization suffers simply because it was a target of opportunity. Cyber criminals sent out a blanket phishing attack against several thousand of the other organizations. And some organizations had multi-factor authentication, some had really good training programs, and they built up resilience. Other organizations that received this same phishing email attack from those same cyber criminals did not have that same resilience and defense built up. And so they are the ones that fall victim to this. So there's a barrier that just gets lowered whenever you're dealing with the human, because when we look at this objectively, you start to see that, yes, as an industry, we have very, very good technology-based defenses. We have really good firewalls. We have advanced malware protection. We have ways of looking at heuristics. We have endpoint protection platforms. We have lots and lots of things that we've done. And so it becomes very difficult for cyber criminals and very time-consuming and costly for cyber criminals to brute force hack their way into most organizations today. And so if you're a determined cyber criminal, you're looking at a few different things. You say, do I take all this time and effort and money to do it? Do I burn a 0 day if I have one? Or do I try to call up Bob in accounting and trick Bob into doing something? Or send Bob a phishing email and see if Bob clicks on the link? Well, the easiest thing, the fastest thing, the most cost-efficient thing for the cyber criminal is to do that, or maybe do a little bit of research and then do that. I mean, we saw with the MGM hack several months ago that a $33 billion organization was taken down with a little bit of LinkedIn research, what we would call open source intelligence gathering. The cyber criminals wanted to understand the organization, the hierarchy, some of the titles, some of the key players. They did that research. They called the call center, had a 10-minute conversation, and brought the organization down. And so social engineering, exploiting the human factor, phishing is the de facto way that cyber criminals are continuing to have success. So this has to be something that we put a lot of focus and diligence on if we want to really work as an industry to reduce risk in all the organizations that we serve. So with that, let me talk about this study that we do annually. It's called the Phishing by Industry Benchmark Report. We do it annually. And the methodology that we have has been set for several years now. I've been here 7.5 years. I think I ran the first or second one that we did. It's hard to remember that far back. I think it was the first one. And Greg Kress and I worked together. We established the methodology and established some of the terminology that we use as we do this, and have been refining it ever since. And Joanna Huisman, who's on the call, has been running this process and working with the different evangelists within different regions to do analysis, and working with Greg and his team to look at the data and do the analysis on that for, I think, probably the past 4 or 5 years. And the data has just grown and grown and grown. Back when I started, we had a certain number of clients. I don't want to accidentally get the number wrong. But where we are right now is we have over 65,000 organizations that are know-before customers. And because of that, we have tons and tons and tons of data. And so as we look at this, we're looking at inclusion and exclusion criteria for the data, because we're wanting to do essentially a cohort analysis and be able to follow people over a long journey within their phishing simulation programs. And so this year's data set included 54.1 phishing security tests, over 11.9 million users, and 55.7 organizations. We'll give you the breakdowns of that in just a minute. But I want you to take in those numbers for a second. 54.1 million phishing security tests, nearly 12 million users, and 55.7 thousand organizations. When you talk about something that is statistically significant, those numbers are undoubtedly statistically significant. And no other organization, no other security vendor in this space has that amount of data with this specific type of data, specifically talking about phishing testing. And that becomes very, very significant, because what we start to understand then is not only within our own client base, and I'll explain this in a second, but not only within know-before customers, but with people who are not yet participating in any vendor program, whether it's know-before or not, we can get an idea of what their susceptibility is, because the methodology that we have is looking at a baseline as well. But before we get to that, let me give you a breakdown on the organization sizes. We talked about, and I'll go back to this past one, 55.7 thousand organizations. So what is that comprised of? 42,488 were small organizations. Just about 10,000 organizations were mid-size, and 3,253 organizations were large organizations. And so that's the breakdown. And all of those are statistically significant. I frequently see tests, or I should restate, I frequently see studies in security and research in our industry that has a full data set of way less than the smallest breakout here, where the full data set is 1,000, 1,200, and every single metric that we're collecting is being represented in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions when we're looking at phishing security tests. So that becomes really, really interesting because that gives us a discrete, very granular understanding of what's going on and what's possible. So here are the industries that we cover. I'm not going to read all of those, but you can get an idea there. And what you can probably see is that you're represented in some way in that data set that's there also. So this is data that will be valid to you. And here's that methodology that I talked about. Phase one is a baseline. So that means that the organization, the users that you're sending these tests to, have not really had any type of training done before. So this is giving you a no-notice understanding of what their susceptibility truly is if they were hit today with a cyber attack that came through the phishing vector. So what's that like? Phase two happens about 90 days later, 3 months later. And in phase two, they've received that initial baseline and at least 2 other phishing simulation tests coupled with some training, newsletters, video modules, you name it. There's another component of training that's there. Then phase 3 is after 12 months and 12 consecutive phishing security tests combined with some kind of training. And so we get a baseline where there's not been any training. So that's your understanding of how bad the situation is. Then 3 months, how fast can you get some measurable progress? And then 12 months after a year of having a program in place, what is possible and what are we seeing? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joanna, rest my voice a little bit, and let Joanna take you through a lot of the discrete data elements that have been collected. And I'll poke in here now with some questions and pithy remarks.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Thanks so much, Perry. Excellent start for us. Let's jump into some of the numbers. And everybody likes a top 3 list, right? And this is probably one of the more discussed slides in the presentation is that, who's at risk, right? The top 3 riskiest industries by organization size. And so when we look at this, let's start with the small organizations first. Among small organizations, of which we attribute that to between 1 and 249 employees, healthcare and pharmaceutical industry lands at the top 3 for, it's the 3rd year in a row after spending the past couple years, really struggling within their industry for many reasons. They've got a PPP of 34.7%. This is a 2-point backstep over previous year results. We see education at 32.4%. It also finds itself in the top 3 for the 3rd year, this year at the number 2 spot. That's slightly more than 1 point lower than the prior year. But new to the top 3, we find hospitality with a PPP of 31.2. And that's a setback of more than 4 points over the prior year. All leaders encountered a decline from their past positions. Now, you're going to see some repetitiveness in the medium and large categories. So within mid-sized organizations, of which we quantify that between 250 and 999 employees, we saw hospitality industry moved into the top spot with a PPP of 39.7. That's an 11-point regression versus 2023. So it's 11 points. That's significant. This marks hospitality's 2nd time in the leading position in the last 3 years. We see healthcare and pharmaceuticals also in the medium top 3 list. And they're in this medium ranking again for the 3rd year. This year shifted down into the number 2 spot, PPP of 38.8. But despite no longer being in that number 1 positions, their performance continues to deteriorate over prior years. In the last spot there is consulting. They've moved in the top 3 for the first time we're seeing them in this medium category. with a PPP of 36.2. This also marks a 5-point downturn from 2023. And what we're seeing here as well is that, each leader faced a downturn compared to previous performance, same as we saw in the small organization category. So for large organizations, which are 1,000 plus employees, healthcare and pharmaceutical, which achieved top 3 rankings across all organizational sizes, as you will see, secured the number 1 position with a PPP of 51.4%. Now that reflects a nearly 5-point deterioration from 2023. In 2023, the insurance industry had kind of a 2-year hold on the most at risk in this particular sector. This year, they've moved to second place with a PPP of, almost 49%. It's a 4.5-point improvement over prior year, but still at 50%, right? And so we also see the energy and utility industry maintained its 3-year streak in the top 3. It shifted from second place to third with a PPP of 47.8. It is a 3-point improvement over prior, but again, at 47.8%, at insurance at 48.8%, at healthcare at 51.4%. This means that, almost half of the employees within these industries, within these large organizations, have the propensity to click on something that could make these companies, organizations vulnerable.
Yeah. And the scary thing here is that this is one of those lists where being at the top of the list is not a good thing at all. And the organizations that you're seeing top this list are the ones that you would probably hope are not going to be on a list like this, right? You would hope that your healthcare provider, your pharmaceutical companies are not susceptible to these kind of attacks, and that regulatory controls and everything else would have been effective. Same thing with energy and utilities, because you're talking about critical infrastructure with that. So there's a lot of concern here. And then on the small side, I think education, we understand struggles with education and funding and everything else, but definitely could do better. Hospitality, also understand, very distributed in nature, but those are the organizations that are holding a lot of our data, right? When our credit cards get leaked and compromised, a lot of that's from hospitality, and they know a lot of our travel patterns and habits as well.
Yeah, and when you look at healthcare and pharmaceuticals or hospitality or energy and utilities, we're talking about large workforces that aren't necessarily in an office tied to a computer or a electronic device, right? We're talking about people who are remote in the field, in hospitals, right? And so these individuals it's a little bit more challenging to kind of bring them into more traditional training paths. And so alternative measures certainly need to be found there. But I think that certainly, contributes to what we're seeing here. And just the sheer attack, right? And the, cyber criminals, they know that, the technology in, education and or hospitality and or healthcare and pharmaceuticals, isn't where it needs to be and or hasn't been. And so that makes them certainly, high profile targets. Yeah. All right. So then let's take a look now at that phase 1 benchmark, right? And so when we're talking about the phase 1, right, we're talking about an initial baseline test that was conducted with no security awareness training from our KnowBe4 platform, no prior alerts, targeting individuals. They're just performing their routine work tasks without any specialized training, right? And so right across the board, spanning every industry and organizational scale, the average PPP that we're seeing is 34.3%, and it's 1 percentage point worse than in 2023, which means that roughly 1 in 3 employees remained inclined to interact with some kind of malicious engagement over the prior year. When we look at the industry size, the 2024 data showed that although, this is very interesting, large insurance organizations were most at risk in this large category, well, significantly at risk, they also had the largest improvement over prior, which is interesting. So while they are one of the worst performing at 48.8%, they had the biggest and exhibited the most improvement over prior year, which was 53.2%. So they're good, but they're still bad, kind of within this phase one analysis that we're doing. The most significant decline was visible in the medium hospitality organizations, which moved negatively from 28.5% in 2023 to 39.7% in 2024. And that was that 11-point regression. The hospitality industry as a whole, they have a ton of information, and handling and preserving that vast quantities of customer data, it really targets them for cyber criminals, right? Data managed within this industry, and we're talking hotels, restaurants, casinos. It's extensive, sensitive personal data, and we're talking a global footprint, right? So the hospitality industry obviously is globally connected, which gives cyber criminals this just really expansive attack surface. And it routinely employs a workforce that has a preparedness that is probably lower from a cybersecurity perspective than other industries. But we will say that the most troubling results that we saw here were found in this kind of large category, right? When we looked at this large benchmark data. And there were several industries here that had PPPs in excess of 40%. Banking,
yeah,
2%, consulting at 47%, energy and utility at almost 48%, financial services at 42%, on and on, right? And so, we're seeing that there are more of these large industries now moving into, very concerning results, and really, a strong sense of susceptibility.
And if I'm looking at that from the outside, and I know a lot of what we have to do when we look at these initial numbers is conjecture as we ask the question why, but and I know that we don't have the answer why really definitively, but when you look at, again, banking at over 42%, you look at energy and utilities, so that's critical infrastructure, close to 50%. You look at healthcare, over 50%, insurance, close to 50%, retail, over 40%. All of these have fairly high regulatory requirements of them that do require at least, some kind of annual training. And I think the story, if I'm going to try to conjecture here, I think the conjecture is that following the base level requirements from the regulation doesn't really cut it. What we're getting at is you have to work on human nature, habit formation, and culture, and really build in kind of the muscle memory to do the right thing rather than the intellectual recall that might be required.
Yeah, spot on, Perry, right? And so I think there's I can lend another couple potential contributing factors here, right? So I think that there's, large populations of people live within these, larger customer organizations, right? And so what I found through our research, and, certainly it spans back to the research that I did at Gartner, is that, we say that, by increasing the frequency, by which you train people and decreasing the time that they spend in training, right? So that's a good recipe, right? So that's a best practice. What we're finding with these larger organizations is it's the reverse, right? And so, the frequency is limited, right? And so they're doing training on, a quarterly or a biannual basis or an annual basis versus something that is more continuous and comprehensive. We've also have, more, companies in this large category that are multinational, right? And so they're global, which again, if you're looking at, how do I then translate, what, the learning is into, other languages that understand kind of the culture and the readiness and can be relevant and relatable to the employees, right? So that's one of those, I think, key factors. And then I'd probably have to say, there's people moving in and out of these organizations, that fluctuate that overpopulation, that overall population, which also impacts kind of that whole kind of, do we have a learning curve that is a healthy one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then let's take a look. So now, why did we get that one again? Okay, let's go into phase 2. And so in phase 2, now we're talking about, population of people within an organization that have had, training, phishing simulations, communication over a 90-day period. And what we're finding is that the results improved with a reduction of nearly 50% on average, right? Bringing it down to 18.9% across. And what we're seeing here is small organizations, the average outcome aligned closely with the 2023 data, which demonstrated a reduction of phishing susceptibility by approximately half over the prior year. I mean, that is significant, right? Modest improvements were noticed within specific industries, but in insurance and technology and transportation, we saw very substantial favorable movement there. Similarly, within the mid-sized organizations, all industries witnessed a significant reduction in phishing vulnerability after 90 days. And while this was a universal trend that we saw in medium, the legal and transportation industry specifically exhibited moderate improvements, highlighting that they could have a more positive progression. And the trend persisted. We saw the same thing in large organizations, with all industries experiencing a substantial reduction, right? And if we just go just to insurance alone, right? So we're going from, an industry that experienced 48.8% when no training was happening to 15.7% after 90 days of training. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, no training, 51.4%. After 90 days of training, 17.7%. Right. And so these are very substantial decreases. Right. And so just implementing 3 months of what we call this new school security awareness training, which is, driving a more security ready culture through content and phishing simulations and communicating regularly. We saw significant improvement in employees' ability to identify suspicious emails, and then not only be able to detect them, but then, understand what to do in order to report them. And so this was a huge step forward in reducing this kind of human risk element.
Yeah, the only thing that I want to point out there, in addition to that, and I'm going to move us back to this first slide for a second, is if you compare the variability between the sizes of each of these, I mean, there's wild fluctuations between the small organizations and the large versions of each industry that's there. Like just, banking 27% versus 42% for the large variant of that. Go down to the very bottom one just so it's easy for skipping from one line to another. Transportation, 27% for the small transportation organizations, 35.1% for the large ones. When you move to consistency, you see the power of consistency across a program that's being run across an entire organization, because those numbers are much more in alignment across each of the different sizes. And I think that that's really interesting and shows the power of a programmatic approach rather than whatever the ad hoc approach was before baseline.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Perry. So let's take a look at now phase 3, right? And so phase 3, as Perry outlined earlier, is after 1 year plus of ongoing training, right? So we're looking at the phishing security tests after 12 months of ongoing training. The results are crazy, right? We see that security awareness on an average across all industries we've noticeably reduced the average PPP from 34.3% down to low single digits, 4.6%. Right? Let that settle in, right? And so for the 4th year in a row, the lowest PPP in small organizations was banking. For mid-size organizations, it was banking. And for large organizations, it was hospitality, right? And so after we look at some of this data again, and I'm going to go back to, what we saw in phase 1, right? If you are a large insurance company and you started out with no training and your PPP was 48.8%, after 12 months of training, we're talking 7.7%. Healthcare and pharmaceutical started at a 51.4%, down to 5.5%, right? And so these numbers are very significant, which shows that by following a comprehensive program of new school security awareness and training, complemented by regular simulated phishing exercises over the course of a year or more, what we're seeing is that the results are just, very dynamic and very dramatic, as the slide says, right? So we're seeing just these, tremendous decreases in overall susceptibility from that baseline to, a year plus worth of education.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I'll put here, and you can stay on the slide for it. Actually, if you go to the next slide, I think that's fine. There are very few things that we do in our security programs that provide this kind of measurable ROI. And so when you're looking at the vast majority of data breaches being caused by human element, and within 3 months, you're able to knock the propensity of something like phishing down by 50% of what it was before baseline, and within a year to have an 86% improvement, or to have that propensity down to under 5%, that's huge. And you're never going to get to zero, the same way that your propensity for being hacked through a technical defense is never zero. You will always have vulnerabilities in your firewall. You'll always have vulnerabilities in your endpoint protection platforms. You'll always have ways to bypass things. But when you're thinking about this from a layered defense approach, what you see here is real ROI and effectiveness. And I think that that's the key takeaway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Perry. Okay, so now let's jump into the international data. And so this is a little bit of an eye chart. We're going to go through the regions a little bit more in detail. But what we're looking at here is, through North America, Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, South America, United Kingdom, and Ireland. We're looking at international differences between phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So I just want to also say that at the international level, we're using a slightly different data set. It does not include separate industries to determine phishing benchmark regionally across small, medium, and large. We included organizations where a definitive country was associated with a customer account, so it could be included in an international benchmark analysis. So I just wanted to make that clear. But let's look across. I mean, and we'll take a look at this a little bit more. But the data from phase 1 to phase 2 and phase 3, it actually follows in suit with what we're seeing with the overall global data, right? Whereas, we're starting off high in the mid to high 30s. After 90 days, we're seeing an almost 50% reduction. And then after a year worth of training and testing and communication, we're seeing mid to low single digits. And so, it holds true across the world when we break it down into regions. So when we look at North America, and the North America breakout was researched by Eric Krohn. Eric is a security awareness advocate here at KnowBe4. And what I'm going to do is just review some of the key takeaways that Eric highlighted within the research. I highly recommend that you go to our site, download this report, and take a closer look, because there's a lot of great data on each region about everything from typical organizational profiles to most prevalent issues and economic impact, cultural adoption, AI influences, which is significant these days, right? But from a key takeaway perspective in North America, the U.S. we see consistently remains the biggest target, but Canada and Mexico, they're not immune to what we're seeing in North America, USA, and they need to also kind of keep up their guards and do the work. In small and medium-sized organizations, that makes up a great deal of our U.S. commerce, and they need to take measures to ensure that business security and continuity continue. Smaller organizations need to be significantly and especially diligent, and security budgets need to be used widely, across technology and the human element, right? And so when we're looking at biggest threats here, the human layer is, one that can promote the biggest amount of protection, but it needs to be focused on, right? And so, there needs to be investment in time and program to ensure that their readiness levels are increasing. And then finally, across North America, a third key takeaway was that the adoption, when there is an adoption of a high quality security awareness and training program, it does make a significant impact on the risk that human layer could pose, right? And so all of these things together position North America, to continue to remain the biggest target, but you'll see by the numbers from a baseline perspective, in North America, without any intervention, we're talking about 35.1%, and after a year worth of training, we're at 4.5%. Perry, any comments on North America?
I think you and Eric both covered it well. North America is, frankly, one of the areas that we tend to, it tends to have a bias in a lot of the ways that we talk about security. So I think, when we're making lots of broad statements about trends that we're seeing, there's a natural North American bias to that. And I think as we move into these other areas, that's where we're trying to even that bias out and give a lot more reflective understanding of the other regions. So let's move into those.
Okay, so let's take a look at now UK and Ireland. My apologies. So in UK and Ireland, we had Javad Malik. He's our lead security awareness advocate. He did the research for this particular region. And so from a key takeaway perspective, what we found here in the UK and Ireland, sorry, my notes were messed up here, is that global threats are still on the rise, organizations of all sizes, but especially what they're seeing in critical national infrastructure and individuals with access to high-risk information. You know, you need to look at their defenses, particularly against phishing and similar social engineering attacks. Another key takeaway was threats powered by AI will continue to rise. And again, in each of these regional outtakes, you're going to see, a significant section on AI influences. But in UK, Ireland, Javad shares that, these will prey on humans in the form of social engineering attacks or through disinformation campaigns. But having appropriate knowledge and spreading awareness of this key issue is critical. And then the third key takeaway was that some organizations have begun to mature their awareness to work on driving behavior change and building a stronger security culture, and that these organizations will fare much better in the near future when it comes to reducing risk and having a workforce that makes these smarter security decisions. Perry, anything on the UK?
Maybe I'll make a broader comment about UK and I, and then also some of the Scandinavian countries when we get to the EU, which is that there is a hunger and an appreciation for the science of the human part of cybersecurity in these regions, and that's really interesting and good to see that people are really interested in focusing on behavior, understanding behavioral science, and understanding cultural dynamics and the factors that those can play in really driving down risk.
Yep, thank you. And you'll see in UK and Ireland, very similar to North America, the baseline started at 32.3%, and after a year worth of intervention went down to 4.5%. So let's move on to Europe. Europe the research was conducted by Dr. Martin Kramer. He is one of our security awareness advocates, and he is also a data scientist on our team with a PhD. And, his findings were also remarkable in Europe. And some key takeaways that we found there is that European organizations perform on an average better than the rest of the world. And that's indicating an increase in appreciation for cybersecurity and a general awareness of kind of online scams. And that might attribute in part to the much discussed stringent regulatory and legislative landscape that they have. Organizations are falling a bit behind when it comes to sustained long-term engagement, with the PPP for medium and large enterprises lagging the worldwide average. And then the last key takeaway was that the region needs to continue to evolve with its regulatory regimen on a daily data protection and from an AI perspective to stay at the forefront of cybersecurity as European organizations start to more broadly adopt AI tools. And we see there, again, we're looking at a baseline which is, very consistent with what we saw in North America and UK, Ireland at 32.6%, a little higher at 5.5% after 12 months, but a significant improvement overall. We're talking, low single digits there. Would you have a comment on Europe or?
No, I mean, just bringing forward the last thing. And then also, Europe is a big multiplicity of cultures and countries. And so finding commonality across all that when it comes to data it's always an interesting way of looking at how all those mindsets and cultures come together in a collective report like this.
Excellent. So let's take a look at Africa. Africa research was done by Anna Collard. She's Senior Vice President of Content Strategy and an Evangelist for Know Before Africa. And Anna's findings, and if you look at the baseline there, a little higher than what we're seeing across the other regions we've just discussed at 36.7%. And at 1 year, we're still seeing, though, a very radical reduction at 5.9%. And so some of Anna's key takeaways were that Africa is a highly attractive target because of vulnerabilities within many of the region's public sector organizations. There's a lack of budget, adequate resources, skills shortages, and the cascading social and economic disruptions that can be achieved by cyber criminals. Many businesses in this region, they can't even afford the most basic security controls. And then those that can invest and have the money to invest struggle to find the needed cybersecurity skills among people and talent that they need to bring into their organizations. Additionally, most organizations in Africa are embracing emergent technologies and embedding them into day-to-day operations. However, what Anna found was that not enough is being done to regulate their use or educate users on the risk, including things like disinformation, privacy, ethical concerns, inaccuracies, and other important critical thinking that needs to be done within this area. And then from a final key takeaway perspective, Anna shared that these are challenges that need to be addressed through a combination of regulation, guidelines, awareness, and training. Special attention should be given to threats posed to society through malicious use of new technologies, such as deepfakes, especially in this area of the world when it's used for some kind of political manipulation. Major elections are coming up in South Africa and other areas of the continent that's, will drive the need for educational campaigns here. And more public and private partnerships are required to assist Africa's public sector. Collaboratively investing in Africa's youth also, and providing cybersecurity training opportunities and exposure will only help fill this talent shortage and skill gap. But also in a country that faces, a significant unemployment problem among the youth, this could and potentially help address that. Africa also has the most humans coming onto, digital access than any other region. And so there's a volume there that needs to be considered and that needs to be certainly, trained and stewarded through this process.
Yeah, and I think Anna consistently is publishing great research. So she's got a number of other research notes where she studied the effects of rapid emergent technology and innovation and kind of influx of smartphones and Wi-Fi and everything else on the continent. And the fact that the training and the adaptability that's needed to build resilience and good digital hygiene is not keeping pace with the influx of technology, which is, when you think about it, that is a microcosm of what's been going on in some parts of the world when it comes to the newest technology that we're all focused on, which is AI. But Africa has been showing that across a multiplicity of other technologies, as there's been a big influx of several pieces of infrastructure.
Thanks, Perry. So along with all kind of the front end research, I also took on South America and looked at that region as a whole. Now you'll notice there that the baseline is higher than what we've seen across any of the other regions currently, at 39.2%. But what I want to point out is, look at what happens after a year worth of continuous content, testing, communication, right? One of the lower 12-month results at 3.9% PPP. Some of the key takeaways that I found in South America, varied stages of development across this region led to, a broad range of cybersecurity needs among all of the different countries. There's also a real noticeable lack of coordinated defense mechanisms spanning this region, leading to significant disparities in preparedness coupled with response. There's not a lot of talking from one country to another or sharing. The pace of digitalization is accelerating rapidly. And with the limited cyber readiness of this regional population, widespread adoption of new digital practices creates a significant cause for concern because they're just not there yet. They're not where the other regions are in sophistication or, kind of in their ability, to take kind of this cyber world on. Organizations are also grappling with a shortfall of personnel, skilled employees in this cyber world. They're having a problem there. And, the challenge is going to lie with, how do we bring up this kind of, new, collection of, youth that are coming into the working market and increase their ability to be able to take on these cyber challenges that are resident within South America that are currently being neglected. And so big challenge for South America. However, when they focus on it, what we're seeing is that there is significant improvement. Perry, anything there or?
No, that's great. Okay. I'm conscious of time, so let's move on. Yeah,
good. Let's move on. Okay. Asia, when we look at Asia, this particular report was co-authored by Philip Nee. Philip is a senior director of sales at KnowBe4, and Jeremy Schwartz, he's one of our senior content marketing managers. What we saw here is, one of the lower baseline at 28.4%. And then after a year, we're at 5.5%. A couple key takeaways here is APAC is surfing a rising wave of cyber threats, spotlighting the need for state-of-the-art defenses. AI is revolutionizing defense strategies against cyber attack, enhancing detection, prediction, and response. But AI is also presenting new challenges as adversaries leverage AI for offensive purposes. And then the human layer of security is pivotal. The only, one big challenge here is that, there's not a lot of communicating from one country to another. And that's posing a large problem. So whether it's language or cultural hurdles, what we're seeing is that, more communication needs to be done among the countries so that they can kind of alert each other and also be, on the defensive together. And then the last region that we looked at was Australia and New Zealand. And Australia and New Zealand was myself, coupled with Joe Gillette, who's a director of sales at KnowBe4. And Australia, pretty consistent with what we saw in North America at 34.4% at a baseline and 5% 1 year later. Some of the key takeaways there, as threat landscape continues to evolve, cybercrime is expected to intensify. This region currently exhibits a lack of preparedness for the impact that AI is going to have. It's imperative to embrace a proactive strategy here, from an education perspective, investments, everything related to AI initiatives. And then this region stands to benefit from greater cooperation in exchanging intelligence. Again, something similar that we saw in Asia, we're seeing here. They need to participate in more of a global information sharing. And this is going to be critical in improving their, insight and proactivity in these emerging dangers that are going on around the world, and help them kind of get ahead of it. So, Perry, I'm going to actually pass it back to you now, and we're going to look at the actionable tips and strengths that this human defense layer can create.
Yeah, that sounds great. As we get ready to close out, I think that what you see here in the hour that we spent together is that there is a ton of data and a ton of work that's gone behind this report and a lot of expertise that can be teased out to, just little nuggets of wisdom whenever you pick up this report. And so for those of you listening, I really encourage you to dive into the details of that. Also, look at the authors behind each of those sections and follow them, because they are the ones that are really the experts in those regional variations, and will be able to help people within those regions figure out how to implement tools, technologies, processes, and so on that can actually make a difference with the security posture of the organization and reduce risk. But these are the things, work on security culture, show how to build in social pressures and social norms. Look at things like behavior design principles and how you can motivate people to do the right thing. Look at culture carrier programs, which some people call security ambassadors, security liaison, security champion programs. Find ways to measure the efficacy of what you're doing. Don't just talk about what you're doing. Don't just put butts in seats or eyeballs on screens, but measure what you're doing and be able to tie that back to reduction of risk. And so things like the Phishing by Industry benchmark report help with that, because they give you that comparative report, but also having a vendor that gives you access to that data, pushes you into the best practices, gives you all the tools, all the content, all the support that you need to be effective, is super, super important. And then keep it going. Don't just do a one and done type of program or a once a quarter program. You really have to view your program and your employee base through the eyes of an attacker, and keep the messaging up, keep the program up, keep the engagement up continually, because what we've seen is that, and we know this through learning science, we know this through behavior science, we know this through anything in life. If you stop, you lose progress. And so consistency is key. Commitment is key to getting the results that you want and building the resilience over a long time to push down risk. So every organization is at serious risk. We have to work on awareness, culture, human risk management. We need to strengthen that. And you can get measurable, real results, cutting down that risk within 3 months when it comes to something like phishing. And using this over a long period of time really gets that down into the single digits. And then being effective means that you can help really accelerate the results. You can be an example in your industry, in your region, when you do this well. And so with that, you know who we are. We're KnowBe4. We specialize in this. We're always here to help and help you be successful, put in the processes, tools, and programs that will help you make a difference in your organization and reduce risk. So with that, Joanna, thank you so much for spending the past hour with us. Those of you who are listening, thank you for spending the past hour with us, and we will see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Perry and Joanna, for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us today. I know I found that incredibly interesting, and I'm certain you all did too. I do want to remind you to visit the handout section to get some of those great resources and follow-ups from the chat here today. If you haven't hopped over to the handouts tab, you'll find the 2024 Phishing Benchmarking Report for North America in there, the Security Culture How-To Guide from KnowBe4, and a copy of the slide deck from today's presentation. So definitely grab all of those. I want to mention that there were a ton of questions that came in. However, we don't quite have any time today. So any of those questions will be followed up upon by KnowBe4 after today's webinar. So do not fret. If you did ask some questions or you were seeking some information, you will definitely be addressed and followed up upon. So with that, before we wrap things up, I have a little bit of exciting news, one more little bit of fun to add to an already awesome webinar. It is time for a prize giveaway. A reminder, you must be present at the live webinar today to win. And today's winner of a $250 Amazon gift card is Arun Subramanian from California. Congratulations to Arun. As always, we will be in touch about claiming your prize after the webinar. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank KnowBe4 for making this webinar possible, and especially to our incredible speakers who have given us so much to think about today. And hey, well, sending high fives and special thank yous to all of you out there for making things possible as well. I know sometimes it can be difficult to stop and lift up our heads from the day-to-day of it all and take in new information, plan ahead, and strategize. You all did just that, and I hope you're feeling energized and ready to take what you heard today and make use of it in your organization. I know I personally have learned a lot from this session today. I hope you all have as well. I cannot wait to see you all at another webinar again soon. And until then, I am wishing you all an absolutely magical rest of your day. Take care, everybody.